Hello everybody and welcome! Today I thought we'd look at a classic, yes, the Space Shuttle. Well, it's been a while since I've built one of those, and yeah, I thought I'd show you how I went around that this time with the new things that are now available in Kerbal Space Program 1.4. First of all, we need an orbiter. And since there are these handy little parts that almost look like a real space shuttle, I thought, well, why not just use them? You may remember my 10-minute shuttle build that I did a while back, so you can imagine that I got the hang of this already, at least covering the basics. Okay, what do I want over here? I want to have some sort of stabilization, of course. Then, of course, I need to have my payload decoupler, or in this case, docking port, of course. Now, interesting part is the engines. You can see here you could use this special part with a three-way symmetry. Problem is, if you want to adjust the engines later on, which we will have to do, then this happens. And yeah, that's not going to help us later on, so don't keep worrying why I'm using this method of attaching our RS-25 Space Shuttle main engines. So yeah, this has a very specific reason, and we also want our parachute that we need to fire as soon as we land. We need more power, or at least I want to have more power. Now let's get to the wings before we go over to the orbital maneuvering system. What I like to do here is I want to attach the extension, this little wing strake here, already on the big wing, so that we do not need to move two parts when we want to move the wing around. Of course, the Space Shuttle was basically a cargo base sitting on top of one giant wing, so in reality it should be something like this, but for visual sake we're gonna do it like this. Okay, and then of course we need to have our ailerons, the big S ailerons. Careful how you pronounce those. This is something I have no idea why the makers of Kerbal Space Program have never thought about how people attach stuff to their spaceships. So yeah, why these control surfaces act like they do is a mystery to me. But yeah, they never sort of start in a flat position as they should. Okay, this here should only do some yaw control, and these shouldn't, of course. Okay, let's take care of the payload. There we go. We're gonna use the Jumbo with a 64 tank, and for old time's sake, yeah, let's make it orange. Time to attach some landing gear, which is easy enough. Yeah, I'm going to attach it to the cargo bay. Why? Because then I don't have to deal with using the rotation gizmo to align it with surface. Now, there's the tricky part. OMS system, which means orbital maneuvering system. This is the propulsion that the Space Shuttle used when it was in orbit. And what I'm going to do here is I'm basically just mocking some sort of shroud for the OMS that the Space Shuttle had in reality. Because in reality, these contained also the fuel for the OMS and some other guidance system. And then, of course, I want to add, to keep it sort of realistic, monopropellant engines. Because, of course, the OMS was, I think, hydrazine. Was that the correct fuel type? What I'm also going to do is add some more stuff for maneuvering in orbit. we want to have our translation and whatever controls. Then we're gonna need 2 up here. Also, I want them to fire straight. Put it closer to the cockpit so that the Kerbals inside have something to look at when they are firing their reaction control system. Also, it makes it easier to align the bottom part, because then I can just align it down here at this line. And now we're gonna do the same with the backwards facing ones. I'm gonna do these here. And then of course we need some that face upwards and downwards. What I'm doing here is basically also how the Space Shuttle reaction control system was positioned. It was sort of on the edge of the OMS canisters and the back of the Space Shuttle. And then we'll come to the tricky part. And basically, it's not just the tricky part, it's one of the most important parts in building or constructing a space shuttle in general. Also, I think in real life, because it now all comes down to balance. What I now want to do is I'm using Kerbal Engineer Redux, which is essential for something like this, if you want to build something like this. Okay, I have my OMS system up here, and as you can see here, there is this torque figure over here. And the closer this is going to be at 0, the more stable your aircraft is going, or spacecraft in this case, is going to be. So what I'm going to do here, yes, is just adjusting some tiny rotation. I mean, I was really lucky with positioning those. I didn't expect it to be that well. But if we get rid of our payload, we now have 0.01 kilonewtons of torque, which is barely non-existent. But if I remove the tank, then we're now at 15. So as soon as we're out of payload, this here is going to be harder to control than before. So we could try to remedy that, so we would be at 5, but then we would be at 15 when we have the payload. So I'm going to stick with the lower number as long as the payload is in there, because the goal of that ship, of course, is going to be to get the payload into space. And basically what you've seen here is the entire trick. So this is all there is to it, to building a space shuttle that actually stays on track and flies as it should. Okay, let's use our mass indicator, center of mass indicator, where we want to put our decoupler. We want this to be right below the center of mass, or at least a little bit in front of it. In my previous shuttle builds, I used the 3.75 meter tanks to build the external fuel tank. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to the new 5 meter parts, because in my opinion, those finally make the proportions of a shuttle in Kerbal Space Program closer to those of a real one. And we also want to have a fairing. Why do I want a fairing? Because in my opinion with fairings you can make the most wonderful curved surfaces, or at least sort of curved, semi-curved. And we also do the same trick up front, but we're going to do it a bit more spiky, so to speak, pointy rather. So this looks more the part than anything I've ever built previously in Kerbal Space Program in regards to a shuttle build. What I'm also going to do is to increase my stability a bit by using these nice little reaction wheels. You may call that cheating, you may also not. I don't care, I like to do it. What I now need, of course, is to transfer that fuel to the orbiter. And therefore we're gonna need an air fuel duct. There we go. And we're going to attach it right in the center here. Okay, as you can see here, we have a lot of delta V, 4,000 meters per second, but our thrust to weight ratio with our 3 main engines is not high enough. Let's try to remedy that, shall we? You can also see the torque indicator gets lower. The number gets lower if I drain the fuel from the back of the tank. So what I want to do is to have most of the mass up front, and then I can better adjust my engines to reflect that balancing thing. Going to try that right now. So we're gonna angle those and we're gonna angle those. This is something I could not have done if the engines were in that radial 3-way symmetry. Okay, and now this is a fine-tuning thing. Oh, we've already dropped to 3 if you've watched that indicator closely. If you're on a smaller screen or not using YouTube in full screen mode, then this might be harder to see for you. I really hope... I think I'm gonna do some editing stuff and highlight it a bit more. Oh, 1.69. That is very close to 0. We're not gonna adjust it completely yet. Why? Well, because our thrust to weight ratio is still not at 1, especially not when using the atmospheric readout. And it's perfectly fine because we haven't attached the solid rocket boosters yet. Okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna use the kickback. There it is, looking good. The only thing is, they look a bit flimsy, or at least not as mighty as the solid rocket boosters of the real shuttle did. So what I like to do here is make more of them. Okay, now I also want a cap on top. There we go. And then we're gonna move those a bit around. Now we have solid rocket boosters that look a little bit more like the real ones, at least visually. Okay, we want to have our main engines staged at the same time as those boosters, and we also want to move them a bit further to the back, because that's how things were back in the day. As you can see also, if you look at the torque numbers, once again they move around. Now, what I did earlier was just the initial tuning of these main engines. Now I need to continue with that, because as you can see up above, the numbers changed significantly. Well, and that's to be expected, since we added the solid rocket boosters, and they of course changed the entire setup of how this thing will behave in regards to stability and whatnot. Now this is looking good. We have 0.21 kilonewtons on the first stage, and after staging our solid rocket boosters it will be 1.33. So this is fine, but we also need to add some parachutes and some Seppatrons to get rid of those solid rocket boosters. And after doing all of that, we now have this little contraption I called the Space Shuttle K1. So why not head to Launchpad and try this out? Alright, we are now on the launchpad for a beautiful dawn launch of our new Space Shuttle. Well, since I said new, this concept of the Space Shuttle is actually quite old, because it was born 40 years ago or even longer. And that should not detract from what a fun thing it is to build one and fly one. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, and immediately after launch we need to adjust our trajectory, to sort of flip on our back. And look at those solid rocket boosters firing. This is actually looking really nice. If you don't know already, the path of a space shuttle is that it sort of flips on its back and rides the solid rocket boosters towards the up in the atmosphere. Then once they decouple, only the space shuttle main engines, the 3 RS-25, are firing. So we're now controlling a throttle. Releasing the solid rocket boosters. We have lost the parachutes. Yeah, in reality they would fire as soon as the boosters are a bit more out of danger, but that was not possible here, unfortunately. Maybe if you use something like KOS, that mod that allows for scripting, then you could use that to activate the parachutes later, after they have decoupled the boosters. And what we want to do is get up higher out of the atmosphere, and then we're gonna do the roll maneuver, which means that we're gonna roll the space shuttle on the correct side, so to speak. I am pretty sure there are detailed instructions how to do this on some NASA Space Shuttle aficionado website. I unfortunately do not know of these procedures, so I'm just gonna do it right about now, while we're still in the atmosphere but out of the thickest parts, so this maneuver does not damage our aerodynamics too much. We're doing pretty good actually here. So we have reached an apoapse of 114 kilometers. And a periapse of 54. This is quite okay, because then we're going to need very, very tiny amounts of delta V to get this thing circularized as soon as we have ditched the tank. But before we continue, I would like to show you something. I tried this shuttle also during a nighttime launch, and after separating the solid rocket boosters, I encountered a very beautiful thing. An eclipse sunrise, sunset, so to speak, because actually it's sunset, but we see the sun rise because we are heading out of the atmosphere, and we see an eclipse. Look at that in the background. Ain't that beautiful? I really love it when KSP surprises you with wonderful things like this. Now, back to the main mission. Yeah, does not look as majestic as I would have hoped, this separation, but it works. Come on, you're going back down. Goodbye, tank. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this never happened during a real space shuttle mission. Or maybe they have decided to stay silent about it. Who knows? So what I did here is I set my maneuver node, and I'm using the mod Precise Maneuver with the circularization option to just plan a maneuver node that circularizes us perfectly. And 47 meters per second is really basically nothing. So time warp has been completed. And we are firing the OMS back there, as you can see. Let's use our lighting a bit. And we've already cleared the atmosphere, so we're safe for the time being. Now we're doing the circularization. Yeah. And I'll stick with that. That looks fine. Okay, we don't have anything to rendezvous with at the moment, so this is just a demonstration of the awesome cargo capabilities of this space shuttle, as you can see here. One full orange tank to orbit. So back in the day, before the 3.75 meter tanks and whatever, getting an orange tank to orbit was basically what you needed to do to sort of prove that your vehicle is capable of performing a really good cargo thingy. Anyhow, we're gonna decouple that. And then we're gonna move away from it. And suddenly we have, of course, a lot more delta V because our mass has decreased significantly. And once we did that, we're going to plan our landing. Okay, of course we want to land at our... Where is it? There. At our Kerbal Space Center. So we're gonna set a maneuver over here. Okay, we have our maneuver node and we're going to warp towards it and then see what happens, shall we? This mission was just for the cargo and for demonstrating how to produce such a space shuttle. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to land on the runway with it. And this should be fine. Okay, we're now in the atmosphere. What I'm going to try here is to set my angle of attack to something between 30 and 40 degrees, which, at least in my experience, should offer the most stable return vector. Let's see if I am correct about that. Heating up nicely over here. As you can see from our speed indicator, we're now very much in a safe zone with 1600 meters per second. What we need to do here is to increase our drag even further, because I'm afraid we're going to overshoot the runway, which is something I did not want to do. Yeah, the real space shuttle also did some sort of spiral movements downward, where it sort of moved in a spiral to bleed off speed. I'm kind of trying to do that, but yeah, the air and the now aircraft, no longer spacecraft, are fighting me on that front. Okay, we're basically in the middle between the main runway and the island runway. I mean, it's more of a nosedive at the moment than a glide. I really need to be careful because if I raised my nose too quickly, I'm gonna stall this thing. And then, of course, we're gonna crash. Not something I would look forward to. If I do this too late, then we're gonna crash anyway. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yes. Finally. Well, that went better than I expected. I mean, you could use your brakes. Come on. Brake. Brake. I'm pressing my brakes as hard as I can. Thank you, unnamed lamp, for stopping my aircraft from, going into the rough, so to speak. I should have touched down earlier on the runway, then I probably would have been able to land this in a nicer fashion, but this is Kerbal Space Program and not NASA. I hope you've learned something in regards to what you should look for when you want to try to build your own shuttle replica. And I also hope you had some fun watching me perform first test flight with this thing. Anyhow, that's it from my side for this time. If you liked this video, please give it a like, please share it with your friends, and if you want to see more of these kind of things, subscribe to my channel. There are new cool things coming really soon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.